Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of DIY Money.
DIY Money. You're still here.
I am still here. I got another round at it.
Because you killed the last one.
Well, we were talking to Ashley, and she was awesome, and I had my lobster socks on, feeling good. So, they invited me back for round 2.
Yeah, and you wore the same socks.
I wore the exact same socks. They're good luck socks.
Can't change them now.
And we also filmed 2 podcasts.
In the same time. Yeah.
But besides that, so
where can people check us out?
You can check us out across
They wanna
all
see the lobster
platforms.
socks.
Yeah, if you want to see the lobster socks, definitely go onto our YouTube. But you can check us out on all social medias. Like you mentioned in the last podcast, we have gone the same across the board. DIY Money Podcast.
Yep. So
That all together.
the longer name, but you can now find us with the same name on every social channel that we're on.
Absolutely.
There's a few out there.
We don't have 7
not
different
TikTok.
names. We're just DIY Money Podcast.
Yeah. So
us
Instagram
out.
at DIY Money Podcast, Twitter at DIY Money Podcast, YouTube
Just DIY
slash
Money Podcast?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Just search
No
DIY Money
ad.
Podcast.
Yeah.
Not sure how it works on Twitter. And you can find us on Facebook, like the Facebook page, DIY Money Podcast. So
Absolutely.
we are officially the DIY Money Podcast.
We are.
Finally, after 2 years.
Daniel, it's
That's
almost like
swell.
we have. This is swell. That is a swell. We're repping the swell today.
Accidentally. Swell does not sponsor the show, but if they'd like to, if anybody from Swell is watching,
Yeah, we love your.
this is a
bottles.
Swell show, and we would love to take your money.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we have a question today coming from Aaron, so we need to get right to it. Dive into it. and
This
see
is a
what he's
really
got.
good question.
It is a great question.
There's a lot of moving parts. I took notes, and you clearly did too.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's hear it from Aaron.
Hello, DIY Money. My name is Aaron from Evansville, Indiana. I'm a huge fan of the show, also from Kentucky, so +1 for representing the Bluegrass, and I appreciate all you guys do. Got a couple questions. So kind of give you my numbers. I am an accountant. I make $45,500 a year. Not a CPA yet, so that number will go up with time. Current living expenses are about $1,200 a month. I have 8 to 9 months of living expenses in cash and as my emergency fund. Other than that, I max out my Roth IRA every year and put 10% to my Roth 401k, 6% match. My question is, with the remaining discretionary income that I have, I'm not really sure what to do with it. It's not a whole lot, of course, because my income level, but deciding if I should add to an HSA or invest in a taxable account. I do have a TD Ameritrade account, but have never funded it. No debt besides student loans, and only goal is maybe buy a house in Tampa, Florida within the next 2 to 3 years, maybe even 5 years, depending on how fast my income goes, getting through the last year of school plus the CPA exam. So appreciate any feedback, any considerations, and appreciate all you guys do again. Thanks.
So that was a lot. That was a lot to tackle there.
Yeah.
We took quite a few notes. So from Evansville, but
Fellow
also from
Kentuckian.
Kentucky.
Yeah.
And that's kind of my story. I mean, I'm from Southern Indiana,
Okay.
across the river from Louisville, in a little one stoplight town, Georgetown. If anybody knows, shout out.
Not Georgetown, Kentucky.
Not Georgetown, Kentucky, Georgetown, Indiana. Then came to school here in Lexington,
Mhm.
and then have been here since. Basically, had
Yeah.
a little stint in Ohio there, but that was we don't talk about Ohio very much. But so it sounds like from Evansville, Kentucky, but then all of a sudden Tampa at the end. So I don't know what all that is about. We can kind of dive into that and figure out the Tampa part.
Yeah,
towards
Aaron,
the
you're
end.
going to have to write us in and tell us the details on the Tampa move. So I guess I didn't understand with that. I mean, it sounds like there's this longer-term goal on the horizon, buying a house in Tampa. And I'm assuming that you want to move and live in Tampa.
Mhm.
So this is just buying a house. But you said buy a house in Tampa, so now I'm not sure if this is like a second house. Like you're renting an apartment in Evansville, you love your job there, you're trying to rise through the ranks, and you're just going to do winters in Tampa.
Yeah.
Doing accounting
Mhm.
remotely or something. I don't know.
Outside of tax season, probably.
Yeah, but if you're moving to Tampa to find a job as a CPA, hopefully once you passed all of your tests and everything, then that's a whole nother story. That's just saving for a house purchase. Location then is kind of irrelevant because your income should reflect about where you live in a normal market.
Right.
And that's just kind of saving for a massive goal on the horizon, which you said, what, 2 to 5 years?
Yeah, 2 to 5 years. He sounded a little unsure. It could be as early as 2 years, could be as late as 5 years, but wanted to get to Tampa at some point.
Okay.
There was a couple other things to digest in there.
Yeah.
Mentioned that there was no debt, but also some student loans. So there's some student loans in there, maybe some cost for the CPA exam, stuff like that. And he has some margin in his account. So after his monthly budget, he has some margin that he has at the bottom line, and he's kind of just wondering what he wants to do with it.
And I like this 8 to 9 months emergency fund. Aaron probably, we recently did a post on how to calculate, sort of cater the emergency fund months to you based upon your situation. So that's up on the blog, DIYmoney.org, not DIYmoneypodcast.org, DIYmoney.org.
Well, we got to work on that.
We'll see. There's an article on the blog there's an article on the post on the blog, however we want to say that, about how to really dial in and calculate your emergency fund amount of months for you. If I had to just take a random guess based upon Aaron's stage of life, that's probably on the high side.
Yeah.
However, I actually like that because as his income goes up in the future and presumably maybe his expenses go up, might have a significant other come into the picture at some point, maybe even kids, I don't know. Having that emergency fund set at that amount means that he's not going to have to work significantly harder to build it up as life gets bigger. So that I actually like. Now he's just talking about where do I put the margin, the extra income that's coming in.
Yeah.
My opinions on HSA, we've talked about it multiple times on the show. I love an HSA. If you're going to use it for retirement, especially, it acts as like a supercharged Roth.
Yep.
And so if you have the option to do it, that's great. The only reason I would maybe not do that, in addition to a Roth 401k plus a Roth IRA, is the fact that there seems like there's big goals on the horizon. So there's buying a house in 2 to 5 years, which is a pretty short-term goal. All things considered. Anything under 5 years in financial planning is relatively short-term, meaning that if something goes wrong, there's not a lot of time to unwind that. So that's why we don't invest in the stock market with that type of money, and really not even in bond funds, really, because those can even be volatile. So that's coming up on the horizon. I'm going to assume that, family changes at some point on the horizon, whether that be spouse, kids, etc. Maybe not, but presuming that you're on the younger side, Aaron, I would assume that that's a potential possibility somewhere out there in the future. And so I would say that having those funds available in some type of taxable is not a bad idea. Just judging from everything we know. Again, can't give very specific recommendations, but looking at that with goals on the horizon, putting that into sort of some type of taxable savings is great. Now, there's a mention of a brokerage account, right?
Yeah, he said he's had a brokerage account set up.
Okay.
TD Ameritrade, I believe, but has not invested in it. Hasn't put anything to work in there yet. But I want to stop and kind of dive into something you said there.
Okay.
You said if it was under 5 years and they were looking for purchasing a house or something like that, that most of the time you wouldn't invest those funds. Can you speak on that just a little bit more?
Yeah. So the stock market is generally a volatile vehicle, right? So average annual returns, depending on how you're allocated on your stock side, historically, over the long term, are somewhere between 8 and 12%. Again, depending on what index you're utilizing, and so forth. Now, the volatility in order to get that is approximately, I'm going to throw out a number. It changes all the time because it's backward looking, and it depends on if you look backward 1 year or 5 years or 10 years, et cetera. But I'm going to say that the S&P 500 volatility is typically 12 to 14%, I believe.
Yeah.
Does that sound about accurate?
Sounds about right.
The last couple of measures I looked at, I believe it was in that category. Again, it changes because markets go through periods of kind of quieter and periods that are not so quiet. All right, we got a little bit of time, so we'll get into the math here. So 12 to 14% volatility, what that means, that's one standard deviation of volatility. That's a long way of saying that roughly 65 to 67% of the time, the average annual returns will not be that 8 to 12%, but it's going to be in any given year, 8 or 12% plus or minus, say 14%. So that means you could have a negative 2% year or a positive 26% year.
Yeah.
Am I doing this math? This is really quick.
Yes. No, it's good. It's good. It's good.
So roughly that's only 65 to 67% of the time. One standard deviation from the average annual returns.
Right.
Okay. Going out 2 standard deviations gets you to your 95%, correct? So you get all the way out to 95%. So the difference between your 1 standard deviation and 2 standard deviations is where the rest of the returns lie, and that's another 14% out. So what that's insinuating is it's very logically possible that the stock market could be down 15 or 20% in a given year. And the time that it could take to recover from that could be different from what we saw last year, which was a couple months.
Right.
1 month.
Right.
Almost. We're recording this in 2021, so we're talking about 2020 pandemic, where the market bounced back very quickly. When we went through, say, the housing crisis or the tech bubble or things like that, you saw certain sectors especially take years to recover. So if you're saving for something like a house and you know you want that money in 5 years, investing in the stock market is not the best idea because you put the money in, you might experience great first-year returns and be feeling really good. But if that were to go down 20, 30, 40, 50%,
and then take 4 or 5 years to recover that.
Yeah, that offsets your plans pretty significantly. So I personally wouldn't do that. I feel like I want to know that those funds are available and ready when I need it. So I would tend to put that in something safer. Now, people differ on that. Sometimes people go, well, I don't really care if I buy a house in 5 years or 10 years. I would rather see a return on that. What would you do if you're coming up? You're a renter right now, too. So someday, presumably, you'll buy a house.
Yeah.
What would you do if it was 5 years away?
So my outlook is, approximately in that time, within the next 5 years, I want to have a house purchase. And I kind of have a diversified approach. So I am about 50-50 on kind of what I'm doing. Investing in S&P 500 with about half of the funds that I want to go for a down payment, and then just literally a savings account with the other half. So I'm kind of trying to balance it a little bit to see if I get a little bit of a return, because I'm okay with renting for now, and I'm okay with, if it's takes a little bit longer to get into a rental or to get into an owned property. So I kind of have a diversified approach. But once I get within 2 to 3 years out, that is going to go all savings. That is just going to kind of accumulate.
And so then you'll just know that it's there and available and ready for you. We did this kind of same thing when we were saving for a car once. We knew that it was 2 to 3 years out, but we knew that we could last longer if we wanted to. So we made all of our other 2 cars were paid off. We were going to replace one of them in 2 to 3 years. So we dollar cost averaged into a diversified portfolio. It was like a 70% stocks, 30% bond portfolio. Might have been 60-40. That's irrelevant, but it was balanced. It wasn't just stocks, right? So we dollar cost averaged into that, made basically a car payment into it every month. And then we got a little bit of appreciation. But there was actually a couple months within those couple years where we were actually under what we had contributed to it. So we were actually underwater in that account. And so that's why if you really needed it at a certain time, that may not be the most advantageous way to do it. It worked out for us. It doesn't always work out that way. And what we have seen in the past couple of years is a tremendous uptrend in the stock market that doesn't always take place in as sort of a nice fashion as it has. So over the long run, stocks tend to appreciate, but over the short run, you can't always bank on that. So what else in his question? Did we miss anything? So HSAs, they're great if you want to plan for the long term. Taxable accounts are great if you just have no other goals. But I guess for me, what's the goal?
Yeah.
And what's the appropriate savings vehicle, method, allocation, et cetera, to get to that goal?
Right. I mean, and I think, like you said, what is the goal? What are your priorities is really what it comes down to, Aaron, is what are you really looking for in the future? What are you looking for in the next 5 years? What are you looking for in the next 10 years? Are you planning on retiring early? So you may need to want to build up those taxable savings, something like that. What is your goal? What is your outlook? And it doesn't have to be a one hit wonder. You could go, hey, I want to have some taxable savings over here, and then also I want to make sure that I'm saving this amount of money for a house down payment into a savings account or something like that.
Yeah, and how flexible are those goals?
Right, exactly.
If you can be plus or minus 5 years, then they're very flexible.
Right.
If you're like, I will buy a house in May of 2026, then you really want the money there in January, February, March, April 2026. I couldn't do the backwards math that quickly in my head.
I was pretty impressed. was pretty good. You were going all over the place. You did all kinds of math. I know we went down a rabbit hole, but I want to say that it's all about your priorities. Like we've talked about so many times. It's all about your goal. What is your mindset and what are you looking for? So let's wrap it up. Live on less than you make. Invest the rest. Do so for a very, very long time. Maybe move to Seattle. I don't know. He's going to figure it out.
Don't move to Seattle.
Don't move to Seattle.
Tampa is where he wants to move.
Tampa. Well,
it was our last show. That was
Tampa.
Seattle.
Sorry.
Tampa's sunny. Seattle's
very
beautifully green and rainy.
But thank you so much. Have a great day.